Welcome to the Global Discussion, discussions with creatives, leaders, and thinkers. My name is Simon Hodgkins. Real pleasure to be joined today by Steve Woodruff. Steve, you're very welcome to the show. Let's begin by asking you to introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you do for our worldwide audience today. So over to you.
So I am a consultant and author and facilitator of workshops, mostly in the business world and mostly in life sciences and pharmaceuticals, as it's turned out over the years. And I've had roles in sales, in marketing, in consulting, business building. But I began to land on this idea of communications clarity. What does it mean to communicate effectively to other human beings? And this has been on my mind and in my practice on a very day-to-day practical level for decades. And I began to get to the conclusion that this was a very big topic. And what I saw was that there were systems for effective sales messaging, effective marketing messaging, effective this, that, none of which were the same. They were all kind of this big jumble. And I got this crazy idea in my head, maybe there could be one recipe for all communications. And as I looked at the brain science, how the human brain processes information, I began to arrive at a framework for one methodology, one formula that any human being can apply for all forms of communication. And that is what's contained. I call it the Clarity Fuel Formula. That's what's contained in my book. And over the years, as I've developed it, I've run workshops for many hundreds of professionals on how to be clear in email, how to be clear in networking, how to be clear in presentations. And so all of that is wrapped into my new book, The Point, which is a handbook for anybody to become clear in the way they communicate, even podcasters.
It sounds like the promised land. It sounds like Nirvana, Steve, because you're quite right to point out that all the different disciplines, they've all got their own sort of processes, and you can read tons of stuff in different areas. Do you think your life sciences background led to that sort of getting down and distilling it down to the clarity, to the point?
Actually,
Life
in some
sciences
ways,
has to be very regulated, doesn't it? Was the point I was going to make. And you
oh
do have to be
yes.
very specific. So I'm just wondering.
In some ways, it was actually because of that highly regulated, highly structured communication. I had to go sort of against the tide. I am urging people to be more simple, more brief, more vivid. And that is, it turns out, much more effective than dumping a whole bunch of highly, dense information. So in life sciences and in regulated industries, finances is this way as well. There's a certain amount of stuff you've just got to include, and it's usually technical and jargon loaded and verbose. But that's not the same as communication. That's just throwing information around. I'm trying to teach people how to actually get their point across to human beings, not just cover their backsides with the right amount of information in an email.
And it's a great point, because ultimately it comes down to, doesn't it, what you touched on? Are you communicating effectively? Are you actually engaging with the audience, with the end user? And I suppose in today's world, Steve, we're in a world of AI, we're in a world of noise. There's so many different digital communication channels, so much content out there. Getting clear, getting to the point, and I suppose resonating with that human that you're trying to reach, isn't that what we're all trying to do nowadays? And it got very complicated, and it's still very complicated for lots of people and brands.
Well, interestingly enough, the challenge has always been the same. And I mean, for generations. There's a lot of distraction. There's plenty of noise. There are other competing interests. And we have, as human beings, limited attention spans. Always been this way. And also the things that work for the way the human brain likes to receive information have always been the same. Stories, for instance, or illustrations, or small snippets. And so what I've put together in my book is not a bunch of brand new stuff, pulled out of some PhD thesis. It's just a common sense approach to what's always worked for human communication. But you've underscored the big problem, which is that we are inundated in a tsunami of information. We're looking at screens 7 hours a day on average. We're getting hundreds of emails. The amount of distraction, the amount of input is absolutely astronomical, which means the challenge of earning attention and getting understood gets greater every day.
Yeah, and I suppose whether you're a business, a brand, or an individual, that challenge continues to grow, and it's also the most important thing, isn't it? Because you've got to cut through that noise, to use the cliche term.
Mm-hmm.
But what about all these changes, though? Because I'm intrigued. You were talking about storytelling, and maybe some of the more traditional things that haven't changed. There's kind of a bit of that. Well, if you tell a good story, people will turn up to listen to it, kind of approach to what you were talking there. And my question really is this: that do you have to, though, also keep abreast of everything that's happening? How do you make sure that you've got your finger on the pulse? How do you continue to learn? Is it listening to podcasts? Is it networking with people? Or is it actually deconstructing what you've learned over the years and really focusing it on the key points that actually turn the dial?
The one thing that I do, and part of this is just DNA level, the wiring of my brain, is I look at a very broad amount of stuff, and then I find the themes and the structures underneath the surface and seek to distill it. So that's how I've arrived at a formula for communication. I do look at a lot of things, but the challenge isn't accumulating information. The challenge is distilling it and making it palatable to the people we're communicating with. So if I have some crucial information for you, but I hide it in an incredibly dense 2,000-word email in 6-point type, guess what? You're not going to get the message because I didn't serve it up right. I didn't make it evident to you what's important. So the skill that we have, and this is kind of one of the main themes of the book, is we all have written in invisible ink a title on our business card, and it's called Communication Designer. You and I, everything that we do in business and everything that we do in a communication that has a purpose, I'm not talking about talking across the backyard and just jabbering with friends, but almost all business is purposeful. We are designing our communications. We're designing an email, we're designing a presentation, we're designing a podcast, we're designing a book, and we're either good at it or we're not good at it. So what are the principles of effective communication design? That's what I've been working on, and that's what's in the book. And anybody can learn it. You don't have to be a rocket scientist. You don't have to be a linguist. You just have to know how the human brain wants information.
I like the idea of that. We've all got that invisible title on our business cards. I do like that because it helps to really illustrate the point, and it does bring clarity, no pun intended, to what we're doing here. But it sounds like you have this universal recipe then for ultimately communication success.
Right.
So, which leads me on to the next thing that I would love you to share with us. Obviously, in the book, I know you've got a number of actions and principles that you kind of lay out.
Mm-hmm.
But is there any sort of advice you could share with us here for our worldwide audience? Maybe some of the sort of key areas that people really need to think about when they want to get into this clear communication sort of mode?
I always lead with this one thing, and it's getting to the point. And why is it so important that a communicator get to the point quickly? And there's a very good neurobiological reason for it. Here's the frightening number. Your brain, my brain, brain of every listener, is actually processing 11 million bits of information per second from all 5 senses. That's how much is pouring into our brains. And we don't even know it. We don't even think about it. It's just happening. When you and I are talking, we can focus on basically one thing. That's a 60-bit information flow. That's our attention. That's our focus, 60 bits. As a communicator in any form, I need to win the 60-bit battle. And the competition is 11 million bits of everything else. People think, what's my competition? I'll tell you what your competition is. It's all the noise, all the distraction, and all the other stuff out there that occupies the human sensory system. So our big initial challenge is, how do we break through that volume of competition? And it turns out that there's this absolutely wonderful filtering system in the brain called the reticular activating system, or RAS. And one of the jobs of the RAS is to say, here's the 60-bit focus. Here's what matters. Here's what you're going to do, and to push everything else to the background. So if we know the magic key of what the RAS is looking for, we can win the attention battle. And in fact, we do know what the RAS is looking for. It's looking for the what's in it for me. It's tuned into the one radio station, WII-FM. What's in it for me? Immediate relevance. If I'm going to gain attention, yours or anybody else's, I've got to quickly show why what I'm saying matters. I've got to give you something new, something interesting, something relevant, something that rises above all the rest. And if I don't, in a very short period of time, a few seconds, I lose my opportunity. Everything else is gone. This impacts everything from a speaker in the first couple minutes to a web designer who may only have 5 seconds to hook somebody that's cruising onto the website. And if they get onto the website and they have no idea why it's there or what's in it for them, they're gone. It's true of all of our communications.
Yeah, we're really touching on some solid building blocks here, aren't we? We've talked about storytelling and what's in it for me, and that almost that brain science, and I suppose your decades of industry expertise all sort of coming together in this clear communication guide and strategy. And obviously, if people want to find out more about that, they can look at The Point, the book, because there's so much information in here. But I'd like to ask our guests, Steve, if I can, what's keeping you busy? What are you focused on over the next 6 to 12 months? Are you one of these people that plans everything out to the nth degree? Do you take every day as it comes? How does that work in a world of clear communications? What's on your radar for the sort of months and quarters ahead?
Well, I have a bit of a unique situation. I'm a solopreneur, have been for 17 years. And so I do a mix of writing, blogging, delivering workshops live or virtually, some level of consulting. I love working on people and their brand messaging and in some cases, career consulting, because the principles that I'm dealing with are all the same. How do I communicate effectively? How do I become brain friendly in whatever I do? So the last couple of years, a lot of it has been getting this book out and delivering workshops. And then I'm hoping to deliver more and more workshops and to move more and more outside of my life sciences kind of home field, because these really are completely universal principles. They don't really have to be just pharma or biotech or medical devices. They're human. So I've spoken with enough other audiences, worked with enough other companies that I know that what we're dealing with here is valuable for any company, any size, anytime.
Can I ask you, Steve, what about, obviously we're speaking in English today, and there's obviously a whole world of languages out there. There's thousands and thousands of dialects, hundreds of countries, lots of cultures and creeds and languages. So does it hold true across it all? Do we have to change our approach an awful lot as we go international?
I think there's a yes and a no part of that. So yes, in the sense that there are certain cultural things about communication and the way you interact with people that have to be taken into account when you're moving cross-culturally. However, the human brain is the human brain. No matter what country you're living in, you have an attention span, you have an analytical ability to process and find meaning. You get the light turned on by things like stories or symbolic language or whatever. I don't care what country you're from. So there's a baseline of it that is just simply plain, has nothing to do with English, has nothing to do with anything but being a human. But there's a certain layer of emotional intelligence and cultural awareness that has to go over some of it. So I can speak as an American and say, get to the point. And Americans tend to be more blunt, more direct, and that appeals. You have to be a little more careful in how you get to the point in some cultures, but eventually you got to get to the point. I mean, if people don't know why they're talking to you, what's the use? So it may be that there's a layer of warm up that's a little different from culture to culture. But if I have a point, get to the point, get the point across, get everybody on the same page. Those are the 4 rules, by the way, of the Clarity Fuel formula. You have to have a point, get to the point. Make sure that you get the point across, which means you share meaning and understanding, not just words. You actually have to define your terms and illustrate so people actually are synced up in what we're saying. And then ultimately, our goal a lot of time is we want to get everybody on the same page. We want to get aligned and reach agreement and reach action, especially in business. Those 4 things, it turns out, that structure, that flow is for everything from a 30-second ad to an hour lecture to a sermon to a podcast to a book, all of it. Same flow. That's what we're looking to do. And I think, unless somebody proves me wrong, I think that's universal.
It's interesting because you're talking ultimately, I think, about the human operating system, aren't you? It's how we're hardwired. It's in the DNA somewhere. It's in there. That's kind of what we all ultimately are looking for, regardless of where we are, I suppose, on this floating, spinning rock that we're on.
Correct. So if we can understand some things about the operating system, that's how we win. So one thing I know, I don't care what culture, I don't care what language. If you dump a bunch of unstructured technical information on me, I'm shutting down. Why? Because that's bad communication design. Don't give me more work. I'm already processing 11 million bits per second. Why are you giving me more work? It's our job as a communicator to make it so simple and approachable and vivid that I am now engaging. That's pretty much the way it's always got to be. And it's not like this is all, like I said, this is not, I haven't discovered something that nobody's ever talked about before. I'm just systematizing pretty much common sense.
Yeah, but I think in this world of noise, it's so critical that we get back to what works and what actually connects us as humans, isn't it? Because you can have machines write content all day long. We can be bombarded with all these messages that you reference in, Steve. But ultimately, it's about engagement. It's about clear communication. It's about connection, isn't it? And that's something that, as you say, there is some universal truth to that, regardless of languages, regardless of lots of, whether it's social or political or whatever background type of context you're thinking about. Ultimately, tell me a story, make it appealing, make it resonate.
Yeah.
Give me the what's in it for me up front kind of thing. The things that you're saying are all sort of ringing true. And as you say, maybe some of these aren't new concepts, but we have to remind ourselves of them, don't we? Because we can get carried away with lots and lots of sort of theories in inverted commas when actually you need to get down to the practicality of delivering clear communication. And sometimes is it about stripping away stuff rather than taking on new stuff? Yeah.
Well, there's a lot of stripping away that has to be done. But I use the imagery of stratifying. And if you imagine a pyramid, and so we have a pyramid, and we have 3 levels. At the very top level is what I call the point, the distilled essence. I want to lead with that because I don't want to leave you wondering where things are going. It's just like, here's where we're going. Here's the point. I've now engaged you, got your interests, secured your RAS. Now I've bought the right to go a little deeper, to give some context, some history, some bullet points, a little bit more information. Now I've bought the right, if needed, to go into more detail, the base of the pyramid. So it's not so much stripping away, but it's repackaging it in a stratified way, because that's brain friendly. That makes it easy for the listener to walk with you into the information, as opposed to taking a dump truck and just dumping it, or saying, hey, here's a haystack, go find the needle yourself. That's not our job as communication designers. I'm just, look, Simon, here's the needle. Now, if you want to go look into the haystack, that's fine. But this is the needle.
Yeah, Steve, I really love that, because so many companies, even in today's world, I think have their triangle or pyramid inverted. There's so
Yes,
much stuff, and you never really get to the point. And I think
correct.
just the way you've articulated that couldn't be any more accurate. I mean, it's spot on in terms of getting to the point quickly, adding value. And the other term that I loved that you used was, you earn the right to then share more information. You've earned that right, or bought that right, because you got to the point, you delivered value up front. And I think that's so important. Um, well, look,
One of the things that's often missing as far as getting to the point. I usually start with getting to the point because it's a very familiar idea. It's actually the second rule. The first rule is you have to have a point. And many times, as you know, you've been there, you're in a meeting, you're in a presentation, and you're going, does this person even have a point? Where in the world are we going? And it sounds so simplistic, but very few people start a designed communication with a statement of purpose. And one way to do that, it's a very simple technique I put in the book. I call it the A to B shift. Right now, my audience, one or many, is thinking a certain way, feeling a certain way, and acting a certain way. As a result of this communication, this email, this podcast, this book, this presentation, this meeting, how do I want them to think differently, feel differently, and behave differently? That's the shift. If I can articulate in one sentence that shift, what have I got? The point. That's the point. And if we just go through that process of distilling down where we're going, we can be far more efficient and effective in any of our communications, because we actually have a point. We're not just blabbing, hoping a point shows up.
really like that. And it reminded, I'm kind of smiling here as you're talking, because I saw some lovely little enamel sort of metal badges recently, and they were sort of little shield shaped, the kind of pin you'd put on a jacket or on your top. And it just said pointless meeting survivor. It just made me laugh out loud when I saw it,
Oh, that's
because we've all
awesome. I
been
need one
there
of
where,
those.
yeah,
I
I
need one
mean,
of
they're
those.
ideal. And it just, as you were talking there, when you were saying, well, yes, you've got to get to the point quickly, but it's not the first step. The first step is you've got to have a point worth making. So I kind of like that a lot. So thank you so much for sharing that, Steve. And look, I don't want to run out of time, because I do want to squeeze in two quick questions if I can. I want to ask you if there's anything else that we haven't maybe touched on that you think is important that you want to share, or maybe it is something we've already discussed that you want to double down on. And secondly, and really importantly for people listening to this or watching this around the world, because I'm sure they're getting a lot of value from what you're saying and will want to find out more. Where do you want to point people to if they want to find out more? Where can they grab the book? How do they connect with you? Is there a website? That kind of thing.
Yeah. So one of the most important things to underscore, and it's so simple, I almost hesitated to make it rule 4. And rule 4 is get on the same page. And what's usually missing is nobody makes the page. You actually have to write the summary of what we agreed on, what are the actions, what are the responsibilities. And especially, we talked about surviving meetings. So you want, if you're going to run a meeting, you want to have a page ahead of time of a very clear, specific agenda, and a page afterwards written of where we went. Because as you know, 10 people can walk out of a meeting and have 10 totally different impressions of what was discussed or agreed on. That's not good communication. So we've got to document. So that's rule 4. Rule 3, well, you'll just have to buy the book, and then you'll learn the 8 shortcuts of brain-friendly communication that help turn the light on. So I can be found at stevewoodruff.com, my new website. I am on LinkedIn, very active on LinkedIn. I have a presence on Facebook, King of Clarity. I still have a little bit of a presence on Twitter, X, or whatever that is anymore. But most of my interaction with people and my newsletter and all that is through either the website or LinkedIn. And I'm pretty easy to find because I make a lot of noise.
Well, Steve, continue making a lot of noise, because I think you're making some really good sense. And I'm sure we've added a lot of value to people here, and they'll want to check you out. So look, it brings me nicely to the end of this episode today, the Global Discussion. Thanks to everybody who's been watching or listening to Steve and I talking here about the point, about clear communications. There's nobody better than the King of Clarity to help us through that topic. So thanks to Steve. Make sure that you like, follow, subscribe. Do everything I need you to do to help support this show, but also go and check out the book. I really do encourage you to do that and check out everything that Steve's producing, particularly if you're interested in those important, engaging, clear communications. So thanks, Steve. It's been a real pleasure. And thanks very much for being a guest here on the Global Discussion today.
Thanks for having me. Very much a pleasure to speak with you and your audience.